Morning, everyone, and thank you for a lovely introduction. I'm going to declare right from the start that I love radio. I'm one of these people that grew up anticipating Sunday evening when I could listen to the top 40 countdown with my cassette player next to me, taping the ones that I like the most. And I know those days are long gone, but I still love radio. And it really does enrich my life. And it's really interesting to hear about the power people want to do good things. I'll come back to that in a bit. But I think for me, radio informs, it entertains, and it educates me in equal measure. And it's the medium I actually spend most of my time with. And I was thinking about it as the one I'd miss the most if it wasn't around anymore. And it's not just me, because it's interesting, the Radio Centre's own data, and I'm glad that we're saying the same numbers, unlike poor Diane Abbott, but 35 million adults, over half the population, listen to 13 hours or more of radio every week. And a number, if you add that up cumulatively, I do love numbers, you get to 1,045 million hours listened to every week. More than double that achieved by any of the largest social media channels, which I think you're going to return to as a theme over this morning, which I will come back to again in a minute. I also think there's a couple of prevailing winds, I think of them, blowing in radio's favour. I think the first one is, obviously we've talked already this morning about mental well-being and the efforts of the Duke and Duchess and Prince Harry to make it, put it on people's agenda. The data again suggests that radio is able to create happiness in people, again, more than any other media. And that's, I think, a really powerful thing to be able to claim as a medium, that you actually can prove that you make people happier. I think it also, no speech at the moment is free of Donald Trump. But in an era of fake news, you are the most trusted medium. Radio is the most trusted medium. Again, I think that's really important at the moment. And my favourite tweet, I'll just go back to it, is CNN is in total meltdown with our fake news because the ratings are tanking since election and their credibility will soon be gone. Who was he talking about? Anyway. Now, you might be at this moment thinking, well, has she just been paid to stand up and sort of write an eulogy to radio? And that is not the case. I haven't been paid to stand up. And also, I think there is something that is still troubling me or something disturbing me that I wanted to share. I think advertisers are still not getting the very best out of radio that they could. And I went back to one of the seminal think pieces that our industry has produced. There's two people, Les Binet and Peter Field, who I still think should be anointed in our industry for helping us prove the effectiveness and the commerciality of our industry. They wrote a piece called The Long and Short of It. Has anyone read it here? Great, I do think it's one that everyone should try and read. And what they looked at was, well, they confirmed a few things, but they also confirmed that when we look at media, they plotted them all on this graph where they said, let's look at media, either those that have high reach, those that reach a large number of people, or those that have high involvement. And ideally, you'd want to be, like all graphs, you want to be top right. And there's radio, second only to TV in terms of high reach and high involvement, which is a great thing to be able to say. And they then went on to suggest that they expected that those media with high reach and high involvement would be very good at building brands. And those potentially in the bottom left-hand would probably be better at sales activation. And they decided they'd try and corroborate this assumption. They went back to the IPA database, which has got 1,500 case studies of effectiveness papers conducted over the last 25 years. So it's probably the most robust database that we've got in terms of effectiveness of communications. And they did indeed find that on the whole, it was the media that you'd expect that proved to have the most success at brand building. And this is the grid that they produced. So TV posters, PR, very, very effective at creating what they call brand effects or brand building. There was an outlier, so I'll come back to that. We can begin to see where the outlier might be, and that's radio, which I thought was interesting. And they went on to say, this is what they said about radio. They said, the only apparent inconsistency is radio, which the high reach and high involvement suggests ought to be able to generate quite strong brand effects, but in practice appears not to do so. This may be due to the way radio is often used in practice as an activation channel. Radio appears to be undervalued as a potential brand-building medium. Amongst IPA case studies, 35% use radio, but only 2% gave it lead status. I think a theme that we've touched on already. Why do I think that's such an issue? Because you could go, well, that's fine. Well, you know, it's got different roles and it's not really an issue. But I think what's beginning to happen is the danger is radio ends up being sort of pitted against what I would call the direct response channels. And I think that is a danger because, in a way, that potentially means radio can't ever quite be as measurable as some of those direct response channels. I'm talking about Twitter, Facebook, Google. And I think there's another problem. It's not only just that we're competing with something that might not be we might not be playing to our strengths on. We've actually got a much greater strength because actually we're a highly emotional media, radio, and it seems a waste to me to be not using it in that way. It just is a waste. And why do I say that? Because what we've also known from the data that we've got is that the more emotional we can be, the more effective we can be. And here's a few stats that prove that. Again, when we look at messages that were of a rational or a more emotional nature, emotional has proven to be more efficient. It's also proved to be more profitable. And it's also, when they went back to their database, they found that if you could create an emotional piece of communication, it was more likely to have broader business results. So not just on return on investment, but on shareholder value, internal employee motivation, which I assume must be huge in Channel 4 behind disabilities. So lots of reasons as to why emotional, persuasive communication is more effective than rational. And we've got a medium that is highly emotional, so why aren't we using it in that way? So you might be saying, well, what are you going to do about it? So I thought I'd have a few thoughts of what we could do and how we could think about this differently. I'll come back to that at the end. Sorry. The most obvious thing to say, I guess, is that we should develop communications that do justice to this oral, as an AU, medium. It's the most ancient form of storytelling. And storytelling, as we all know, is highly emotional, because stories draw people in without needing to sort of shout at them or persuade them or something. And so I was also, as a slight aside, thinking, does it help us in some way to think of radio more as an oral media rather than radio? Because does that free us up to think of communications in different ways beyond sort of 30-second commercial spots? We just made a podcast for the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Division, which has been encouraging the public to report any suspicious behaviour that they might see. And the stories are told by counter-terrorism detectives, bomb disposal experts, surveillance officers. They're all speaking publicly for the very first time about the things that they did to stop something happening. And I think it's highly powerful, it's really useful, it's an oral media, and it is communication. It's just done slightly differently. I also think probably, and I don't know, maybe we're all really good at this, but I wondered if we should be more disciplined about when we're planning radio campaigns, just to be really clear about what we think the role for that is. You know, if I go back to, is it to educate, is it to inform, is it to entertain, and try and be as single-minded as possible about which of those three we're trying to do, because I think sometimes I'm guilty of it myself, we try and do a number of things. And I think if we're going to entertain, let's just be really, really focused on entertaining people. This is a dangerous area for me now. Strategists aren't very good at telling jokes, but I did hear a joke on the radio that made me laugh out loud. And the comedian said, I often wondered how Domino's Pizza got its name. And then I accidentally bumped my car into the first bike of a line parked outside, a pizza delivery. And I just thought, again, you know, it's a visual joke using radio. And that was probably better advert for Domino's than I'd heard. I'm not saying anyone work with Domino's. It was more memorable than a lot of the adverts I'd heard from most of these brands. So I thought, yeah, we can be really entertaining and let's do that really well. I also think probably I'd add one more to those: inform, educate, and entertain. Inspire. And it's been truly inspiring listening to the work you did with the Paralympics. But there is a real role here to actually say people are looking for brands that stand for something beyond just the product that they are. And it is a theme of mine, a passion of mine, I suppose, but how do we encourage them to bring about change and make the world as good as it can be? And I think if we get that right, if we have a purpose behind our brand, we can stand out. Radio is a wonderful media to tell people those stories about what we stand for and what we believe in. And I think we could begin to create quite different communications if we think about how do we inspire people with radio. And this is a shameless plug, but it is sort of linked, which is, as already mentioned, I have written a book. It's a practical manual, really, to say how do we help people create movements. If you care about something, and examples make poverty history, No More Page 3, Movember, even Touch the Pickle that was done in Southeast Asia. Ideas that have galvanised people to take part in something. And I would really, really love to see radio tell some of those stories. And I was thinking about when I put the book together, there weren't that many of these examples of movements that had been created using radio, but I would absolutely reprint the book as soon as we've got some really fantastic, compelling radio stories. So this is a quick flash of the book. Oh, sorry, there we are. There is thank you, Radio Centre. It is free if you do want to fill in your details, because it's not actually being published till the end of this month. But we'd love to send you a copy if you'd be interested. And I guess if I wanted to leave you with one thing, it's just I do genuinely think radio has huge power to move people. And I'd just like to be part of the group of people that say, let's use it in that way to move people. Thank you.